Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Shelley Rogers, Coordinator of Fashion for the Earth at earthday.org. And today, along with our partner, the Conscious Fashion and Lifestyle Network, and its co-founder, Carrie Bannigan, we are so pleased to present the fashion industry's age of invention. But first, a few words on behalf of Earth Day. When the proverbial tree falls in the forest, the most important thing is that its energy and its vitality is not lost. The tree is soon inhabited by creatures on the forest floor that can use it for nourishment or shelter. Fungi and moss and lichen grow on the tree. Where it once stood, other plants can grow as the sun filters down. And finally, of course, the tree will decompose, and then its soil and all of the myriad creatures that live beneath the soil. In fact, the entire forest floor will be benefited by this. In short, nature embraces the life of the tree that no longer exists as it once did, but rather broken down, and its parts used to enrich, reinvigorate, and make new life possible. Today, we call this circularity. The one thing that nature cannot break down is fossil fuels. It can break them apart, but it cannot break them down to be beneficial. In fact, quite the opposite. Fossil fuels are extraordinarily destructive to the earth. Today, unfortunately, the majority of our clothes are made from fossil fuel. Acrylics, spandex, nylon, and the ubiquitous polyester are petroleum products made from crude oil. And true to form, they don't break down, but they can break apart. For example, when we wash our clothes, we collectively send trillions of microfibers into the ocean. They bypass wastewater treatment plants and enter the ocean. And in fact, now over a third of all the microfibers in the ocean are from our clothes. They have made their way into the food chain. They've been known for some time they're in our bodies, but as of March, 10 months ago, it was discovered that they're in our bloodstreams. And currently there are studies attempting to assess what this means in terms of human health and the health, in fact, of the entire food chain. But as bleak as this may sound, there is hope, because necessity is the mother of invention. And today, in every sector of the fashion industry, more and more innovations are coming about that address its problems. So much so that we can safely say, confidently say, that we're now in the midst of a fashion industry age of invention. When you think about clothes, the first thing you think about is fabrics, which are made of fibers, because they are the essential building block, of course, of apparel, of garments. So today, along with the Conscious Fashion and Lifestyle Network, Earth Day is especially proud to present three women who represent their companies and the innovative fibers that they have created. The fibers are sustainable and made of renewable resources that come from the ocean, from the land, and in fact, from used 100% cotton clothing and other viscose textiles. In the future, these will be what we wear, and these companies and others like them will be able to claim that through their pioneering efforts, they enabled fashion to return the resources it takes from the earth and return them back into the arms of Mother Nature, and that they are part of fashion's brave new world of invention that looks to be truly circular. And now, without further ado, I want to thank our partner, Carrie Bannigan, who has consented to be today's moderator. She will introduce our wonderful panel, and at the end, we'll be taking questions from the audience. So please do send them in. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Hello, everybody. Thank you to Shelley, and thank you all for joining us here today. I'm Carrie Bannigan, Executive Director of the Fashion Impact Fund and co-founder of the United Nations Conscious Fashion and Lifestyle Network. With me today, I'll be joined by Alyssa Bayer-Lentz, co-founder and COO of Kintra Fibers, Trisha Carey, Chief Commercial Officer of Renewable, and Tessa Callahan, co-founder and CEO of Keel Labs. Thank you all for taking the time for joining us today. So I'm going to dive in here, and before we dive in deeper to learn about each and of your organizations and what you're driving. And Trisha, I'm going to start with you and then move to Tessa and Alyssa. But I'd like to ask you all, as we know, fashion is going through an age of invention, a revolution in new technologies and innovative materials and processes. What is driving this movement in fashion? And do you think in the end that it's new materials such as what you're all working on that are key to sustainability in the industry? Trisha?
Yes. So thanks, Carrie, for that great introduction and the opportunity to be here today. And I do think, and as Shelley had mentioned, necessity is the mother of invention. And we've reached a point where we realize we can't keep taking and taking and taking anymore. We realize that we've just reached a point of maximum of, this overconsumption that we have. And actually, I think within a lot of our work that all three of us are doing, we realize that all the molecules exist that we need to keep everything going further. So I think this is an incredible time within the textile and apparel industry. We see these evolutions that happen every, say, 20 years. And now is this time that we are all working on the change together. And I think it's amazing because there's a high spirit of collaboration in order to achieve the solutions to what we need.
Thank you. Tessa?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with that. And I think, when we're looking at this new, I guess, era that we're entering, there's that need and necessity for, for collaboration and really for diversification across our supply chains, especially when it comes to the materials that we're using. I think we've all learned that having, one or two available products isn't sustainable on a long-term level. And I think it's been really exciting to kind of see the shift that is coming from all members of the value chain, starting, of course, with consumers and this increase in awareness and education and the drive for connectedness with the materials and the products that we're interacting with on a daily level. And, I think that that's really driving this new era that we're entering. And I think, the work that we're doing, and I would imagine the work that, everyone else here is doing as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Alyssa, anything to add?
I have to agree with all of that. I think much of it is driven by the consumers, by the industry need. And the other, factor to consider here is policy. We're seeing brands starting to be held accountable for delivering on their environmental promises and being measured against that. And so policy and the changing landscape that we're already seeing come into play, has a big role in this industry movement.
Thank you. So, Trisha, we've been seeing a lot going on in this space for some time. And, for a decade, the fashion industry has been on a quest to develop garment-to-garment recycling to cut down on its enormous environmental footprint. And recently, congratulations to you, you have been made the Chief Commercial Officer at Renewable, which is based in Sweden. Now, you can tell us much more about this, but Renewable takes post-consumer fabric and with its own chemical process and recycles it. Can you take us through this? And then also want to highlight the remarkable product, Circulose. Tell us about this. How is it made? What is going on? And how does a brand or a fiber producer work with this pulp to then make its fabric and fiber for clothes?
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks for that. Yeah, very excited to be here at Renewcell. So many changes. It's really, after many years of being involved in the textile industry, to have this opportunity to take circular all the way forward. So at Renewcell, we take textile waste, and we take that waste and it goes through a process where it is chopped up. So it's a mechanical process. The next step is actually that it goes through a wet process where there's even some fiber separation that we can do. We have bleaching within this process. There's a lot of IP and patents related to what we're doing within the technology of recycling the textiles. And then the final process is the drying, where we take the waste that we have then, and it goes through a process where with heat, pressure, and steam, we actually make it into a pulp that's just like this. And then this pulp is then sold to fiber producers. So fiber producers that make viscose, modal, lyocell, acetate, or other fibers. And so for Renewcell, all we focus on is manufacturing this pulp, and we specialize in this niche, and it's the processing part. And it's really the part that closes the loop, because textile waste has been collected, it's sorted, but how do we get it back into circulation? And so this is a critical part, and it's about the technology. RenewCell worked on this for 10 years, and to have this technology to now scale. So we recently opened our full-scale production facility, which is 60,000 tons in Sweden. We'll be adding another 60,000 tons to that within a year. And this is one way that we feel we can really drive the industry forward. Now, how you can work with RenewCell was the second part to your question, Carrie. And I would say first, get some goals going. Establish a framework of what you want to do around circularity. Build some data points into that. Don't just say, I want to be circular. Figure out what percentage, what means the most to you, what can you really impact. And then if you have some waste, we're happy to talk to you about maybe ways we can bring it into our cycle. And then the other way I would say is offtake agreements. The only way for us to scale is to know that the demand is there. Offtake agreements are crucial for smaller scale companies that are growing. And this is one way that we can then go further within the supply chain and connect and close the loop. So make some goals, tell us about your waste, and work together with us for offtakes.
Brilliant. Thank you. And congratulations again. So Alyssa, your search for a sustainable material began, if I'm correct, when you started a backpack line in 2016, and you were struggling to source a sustainable material. Can you talk about your search for the right material and what you then went on to create?
Of course. Yeah. So my journey to new materials innovation really started, Carrie, as you mentioned, out of a personal need as a designer. I actually had started a backpack line that gave back to girls' education. So the social impact piece was always very important to me, how business can be a force for good. But it wasn't until I attended a climate solutions conference where I learned that the majority of the fashion industry footprint, about 70%, comes from raw materials, which are primarily fossil fuel based synthetics, polyester, nylon, acrylic, and those happen to be the very materials that I relied on for performance and production of my, at the time, backpacks. And at the time, I was looking at expanding my production line to garments and other types of apparel. And the material that everybody recommended at the time was rPET, or the concept of downcycling a plastic bottle into a fiber. However, at the conference, I had learned that the equivalence of 50 billion plastic bottles gets into our ocean every single year through microfiber form through our collective dirty laundry. And out in the environment, these bits of plastic, due to their fibrous form, they actually soak in toxic chemistries such as motor oil and pesticides, and they end up in our own bloodstream through the food chain. So I couldn't reconcile moving forward with my designs, relying on these materials that were being marketed as sustainable, but they weren't looking at the whole picture overall. They were just looking at one part, the plastic waste, rather than looking at what could happen if this is put into this new type of system. And so I started looking at alternative fibers. Unfortunately, at the time, we didn't have this wonderful panel. The information wasn't out there, and these innovations, many of them hadn't even been started yet. So I think we've seen, the innovations growing, but the materials that I had access to, they just didn't perform the way that I needed them to. And so instead of a new material, I met a co-founder. And I joined forces with my co-founder, Billy, who is the nano engineer behind Kentra, to scale the solution that we provide, which is bringing the best of nature while also delivering the best performance that is possible through a synthetic material.
Excellent. And congratulations on that journey for even bringing this to market and doing this. And we'll dive in and learn more later. But I just love hearing about your journey. So thank you so much for sharing about that. Now over to you, Tessa. Kelp is a type of seaweed, and you take your inspiration from the sea and say that your innovation is built on the premise of mirroring the natural efficiency of marine ecosystems. Can you please tell us more about kelp, and in particular the characteristics or properties that keep you inspired and your co-founders to begin even experimenting with this and to eventually develop your flagship product called Kelson?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I think that, Alyssa's story in particular really resonates because I had quite a similar journey. And I think, in our founding days, and that stays true till today, we really wanted to take a look at, first and foremost, what the challenges are within the textile and the fashion industry. And obviously that starts with the materials and where those are sourced from. And wanted to take a little bit more of a holistic perspective or a holistic view on what those impacts, particularly those negative impacts, were, not just from the fossil fuel or microplastics perspective, but also when it came to all of the fiber landscape. And what we really found was that the current systems, be that those in synthetics or agricultural, were not ones that could support beneficial and sustainable materials and futures that are built on circularity and circular systems. And so we kind of did a really big deep dive into what exists, what are natural systems and organisms that don't require chemicals, pesticides, lead to agricultural runoff or microplastics. And that really led us to our oceans. And in particular, taking a look at what organisms are available on a global scale. And seaweed is one of them, in particular kelp, which is, can be found on nearly every continent and is widely available. And in addition, its harvesting and growth does not require intervention or any additional fertilizers. It's just naturally existing. So given that kind of availability, in addition to the environmental benefits that leads or are created from its growth, from sequestering CO2 to filtering that agricultural runoff to decreasing ocean acidification, we saw a massive opportunity for positive change in expanding the ways that both kelp and seaweeds are used, and being able to help this massively polluting industry to replace the systems, the chemicals, and the raw materials that it's using with something that's just naturally good for the planet.
This is incredible. Thank you. And Alyssa, like you say, imagine if you had had this knowledge, these materials and access, we don't know where you would be today. So just thank you to all three of you for sharing this information. Now, something that does come up when we talk about sustainable fashion is the expense. A lot of people are really put off by this. They don't think they have access to this, and it is true to many things. And so just looking at this from the sustainable fiber side of things, they tend to be more expensive compared to the polyester and the other cheaply made fossil fueled derived fabrics. Do your fibers solve the problem of cost as well as sustainability? And should sustainable materials be the same price as unsustainable fibers that don't actually account for their real cost for people and planet? Alyssa?
Sorry, I think I have a slight delay, but great question. And yes, that is a conversation that comes up frequently. In our case, our material is made on the exact same production infrastructure and equipment that is required for manufacturing traditional polyester. So at scale, when we have our 60,000 ton per year production facility, which I hope we get to at some point, but at that scale, we will be cost competitive to traditional polyester.
Thank you.
And in the meantime, as we are in process of scaling, I should mention that we will be cost competitive to a premium synthetic fiber as soon as we are starting to integrate into smaller scale production facilities that are in existence today.
Tricia?
Yeah, Carrie, I think when you talk about that true cost, that really needs to come into play. And the other factor within the cost is the risk if you're a company and you don't change. And now with policy coming in, there's an additional risk to that. So how do you even put a cost on everything that we're talking about and all the benefits? And, in all of our cases, the comparison are to commodity priced fibers that have been around for tens of years or hundreds of years in some cases. So that's where it makes it very difficult. At RenewCell, what we're making is 100% recycled textile pulp. There is no other 100% textile recycled pulp to even compare it to. And, as Alyssa's saying, it comes in, the models are built to then scale and be very price competitive, especially when you can be within a plug and play system. So when you don't have to then modify everything else in the supply network. The other factor I just wanted to raise is that there's often this innovation factor that then the rest of the supply chain tries to add on. So sometimes we call it the bullwhip effect, where one product, one sector can cost a little bit more and then suddenly it gets multiplied throughout the supply network. And that's where we all have to collaborate and realize that there's going to be new ways of pricing when you shift from a linear model to a circular model. And that we have to have the strong communication and ties as collaborative partners, that there's not going to be that bullwhip effect that happens in the market.
Thank you for that insight. Tessa, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I mirror everything that was said. And, in particular, kind of to your point, Trisha, I think that we need to take into consideration the overarching cost and the true cost of our material production. And currently, the models that we have built out, especially in the commodities market, come at the expense of both workers and the planet. And for that reason, I don't think that it's appropriate for us to even discuss being able to work within that range, because that's inherently going to be negatively impactful from a social or an environmental perspective. That being said, I think that, of course, cost does need to be a key driver. And, I think when you're combining, for all of us, when you're combining these existing manufacturing systems, knowing that you're able to get to that cost competitive landscape, while also acknowledging, and honestly, something I don't think that, we all talk about enough, is the reality of what it takes to integrate and scale entirely new technologies and the cost requirements of that. And so I think, for ourselves and perhaps for all of us at scale, of course, you're having that, cost competitive price point, whether that's at a premium or not. But, when you're producing 10, 20, 30, 50, 1,000, or even 10,000 kilograms of materials, it's important to be able to get that out there while also recognizing the cost on the innovators that it takes for that to be produced, which is a separate conversation.
It's a panel in itself. It's a whole other conversation, but thank you, because this insight's really important, because I think a lot of times consumers are not getting access to this kind of information to understand why things may be changing or why it's dubbed as expensive. It's just the reality is we've become used to an extremely awful new baseline. That's the reality, and that's where that's got to change. Now, I also just want to say to the audience listening today, please feel free during this conversation to send in your questions, and at the end, we will go through these, but feel free to start sending them in. Now, Trisha, RenewCell is working with major brands, and Circulose, from what I understand, has been used by Levi's in their 501 jeans, and as well by brands like Garni. Now, how is Circulose incorporated into these garments? You touched on it a little bit earlier on how we could work with you, but tell us about these and other brands too that you might want to mention of things happening.
Yeah, so Circulose, which is the pulp that then we sell to fiber producers. And so those fiber producers then mix it together with their wood pulp, and then they produce the fiber, the viscose modal lyocell acetate fibers. So those fibers are then, it's specified by the brands that they want to have fibers with Circulose included. And so what we've been working with, as you mentioned, Levi's 501 is one which shows an example that you can take a product that's typically cotton rich and you can actually add in a new material. You can bring circularity into that traditional cotton garment. So brands and retailers, they can work with us again through offtake agreements. They specify this and work with supply chain partners in order to add circulose and have that ingredient to know that it's a brand, that it's the circularity built inside their garment.
This is incredible. And I love to hear as well, because I feel like Levi's is a classic for so many of us. And to see somebody, an organization, a brand like this, be able to take this on when we hear from major brands, sustainability is too complex. It makes it close to impossible. I like these case studies to show us that it is happening. And hopefully it inspires other major brands to take this action. So thank you. Now, Alyssa, this is something that I think comes up often, and no doubt you get asked about this a lot. Let's talk about how much this can confuse so many people, okay? The fibers, the fabrics, the understanding of how this can work. Can you take us through what the differences are between all of the terms biosynthetic, synthetic polymers, biopolyester, and biodegradable? Can you give us a quick lesson?
This is a great question. And oh my gosh, I forget the publication, but I think it might have been Vogue that did a glossary on, all of the different terms that are being used today. And honestly, I'm so happy that I have a nanoengineering co-founder, because I think, today to be a consumer, you feel like you have to have a nanoengineering degree to be an educated consumer to some extent. So great question. And it does come up pretty often. So to clarify, I think one common misconception is around polyester. People just see polyester in their label. They don't even really know what that really is. So polyester is a polymer. It's PET, polyethylene terephthalate acid. It's a typical AB polymer structure where you have two monomers, TA and MEG, that come together in a joint repeating unit, aka plastic. Fossil-based plastic. Now, just because, let me rephrase that. People often think that because something is bio-based, it is also biodegradable. But that's not the case. You can have the building blocks for traditional polyester, PET. Those could come from bio-based sources. They could come from carbon emissions that are, processed into those sources. But that material, PET, will, no matter where those inputs come from, whether it's fossil fuels or whether it's a bio-based source, PET will always release microplastics because it's non-biodegradable, just because of the way that molecular archetype of that material is put together, that structure. It will never leave this planet through a natural degradation process, through a biodegradation process. There are other materials that are both bio-based and also biodegradable. And that just happens to be because the way that structure is put together, bacteria will get in there and they'll break down those bonds and it'll return naturally to the earth with no harmful elements. And that's the difference, is just because something is bio-based, it does not mean it is also biodegradable. You have to look at the type of material. And then just one thing about polyester specifically is the only commercially relevant polyester that we have today is PET, the same stuff the plastic bottles are made out of. And we're changing that at Kintra. Polyester is actually an entire category of materials, and we're offering a new type of polyester, the Kintra polyester, that we've specifically designed for hyper performance in apparel. And so we're changing the opportunity for the industry to design with a polyester that doesn't have these negative components that PET does. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Someone agrees also. Oh, it's your end. Okay, thank you. Trish or Alyssa, Tessa, do you have anything to add to that quick lesson?
Well, firstly, I feel like I'm learning new things on this panel. So I'm really grateful for that as well. And I think the key there, and especially with what you were saying, Alyssa, is, really making sure that you're providing something that works within those same systems to allow for easy implementation. And I think in both cases, really showing that, you're able to work with, be that existing brands and their existing products, and with, the existing definitions, but improving all of those metrics is so impressive and personally very inspiring to hear from both of you.
Well, I can't wait until the day we all blend and make a super fiber with all of our
There we go.
materials, but that's to
Honestly,
come
this
soon.
is my dream come true. We'll have to chat about it after this.
Oh, yes, and keep us posted, and we'll want to do an exclusive here at Earth Day, another panel when that gets happening. So, but yeah, it's fantastic to see all of this coming together. And then Tessa, just back to you. You recently showcased your product, Kelson, and you designed a number of fabrics using your yarns. Now, how have you made your fabric strong, durable, and flexible enough for apparel? Is this a process of changing the characteristics of kelp in the test tube, or is it because of how you twist and ply the yarn? We really want to dive into this with you, and there's so much for us to learn, especially for myself and the audience. So, you've said you'd also like to see it in the interior industry and maybe even the automotive. Is it strong enough for this many applications?
Yeah, okay. I will do my best to break down this complex question in as succinct a way as possible. So I think yes to all of your questions in a way. So when we look at our fiber performance and the modifications that we're able to do, it really comes from two ends. So one is on the formulation, the chemistry, and really the kind of raw materials that we're putting into fiber manufacturing systems. So that's really where our R&D comes to play, be that through, organic chemistry or fiber science. And so that's your really small scale, detailed focus, and where you can have some really big leverage when it comes to what the end fiber or the end yarn functions as. And on the kind of end side of things, when we look at yarns and textiles, you also have a lot of levers that you can pull when it comes to performance, hand feel, durability, elasticity. And I'm very biased about this because I have a knitwear background. So fibers and yarns are really very inspiring to me because you can customize even after the production. And so what we've really focused on is really balancing those two worlds. So having that back and forth relationship between how the end product feels, functions, and operates, regardless of your textile construction, and simultaneously building that into our R&D pipeline to really understand the various components, chemistries, formulations, additives that we can work with to help make the most desirable product. And so I think when looking at various industries, that's really a big part of it, is seeing where those fibers can live. And obviously, I think cotton is maybe the most accessible example of what a fiber actually is, in that it exists both in your, favorite, most cherished t-shirt, but also in your bed linens, also in your curtains, in so many different products that you have, even your cotton balls or your Q-tips. And so for us, we really see an exciting opportunity to explore not just the fashion landscape, which is our first focus, but really the overarching textile and fiber landscape. How do we make sure that we're actually providing solutions that are able to live in these various environments, having different performance metrics where applicable, but really thinking about how the end consumer is interacting and what can we do to support that, both from the molecular side and from the fiber spinning, yarn spinning, textile construction side as well.
This is brilliant. I'm a huge advocate for cross-sector innovations and for the fashion industry to stop being so siloed. So I love hearing about how you have these goals to really take this to other sectors. And so we'll definitely be keeping an eye out on that. Now, this is a question for all of you. Now, sustainable fashion marketing, which we see everywhere, and I feel like it's nonstop on every channel that we tap into these days. But sustainable fashion marketing is obviously very different from sustainable fiber marketing to manufacturers. But I'd be intrigued to know, how do you market your fibers? Is it from conferences to research groups to climate advocates through to industry stakeholders and storytelling? What has been the most helpful from your own experience here? And Alyssa, I'll start with you.
Great. That's a great question. Thank you. And at Kintra, we've had quite a few, and so this is actually something I was really pleasantly surprised by. I thought we would have to be hardcore, knocking on doors and really proving out the value of switching to a Kintra bio-based polyester to manufacturers. But it's been the other way around. We've had so much inbound, both from brands big and small across luxury, athletic, ready to wear, and everyday apparel, and also the manufacturers that support those brands. So I really think that there's been perhaps driven, as we spoke about earlier, by that consumer demand piece, also by that policy piece. These manufacturers and the brands are starting to realize that if they don't get their hands on new materials early that deliver on science-based climate targets, they're going to be missing out. RenewCell is a great example. I mean, it's 60,000 tons. I would have wanted to be number one to have an offtake if I were running an operation that wants to be competitive in this new era that we're approaching. So I think for us at Kintra, just to go back to actually answer your question, it's twofold. I think one, being active in industry groups, connecting with our peers, and also providing that kind of ability to have a discourse early with those manufacturers who are also a part of that group, who might just be taking that first step into looking at innovation, coming from it, I guess, in a non-judgmental way, and just saying, what are your needs and how can we make this integration as easy as possible?
Thank you for that. Trisha?
Yes, and thanks, Alyssa. Those are all great points. And I think just to add to that, yeah, I mean, trade shows are very important. I happen to be at one right now. In Munich, it's Munich Fabric Start. And really it's about how we can educate. We do a lot, even education outreach to colleges that come to us. But I think I agree with you, Alyssa, there's so much demand for this, and it's kind of a race to space that we do get a lot of inquiries coming our way. Social media also plays a big part of it. I would say on a B2B level, LinkedIn is essential to be posting there regularly. And then, we've even have been very fortunate because we have such a true, authentic story that we even have had coverage in the New York Times. We were front page of the style section back in December. So I think this is really also how it brings to a consumer level. So it's a B2B to C marketing that we have. And we look at that as an ingredient brand of how we can communicate all the way to the consumer by co-branding with all of our brand partners. But first, it takes having a very clear message on the B2B side. But certainly there's a wide audience of interest that we have from the market.
This is excellent to hear. And it also just shows the need and want for this, and also how it is just changing, how the communications are changing. And congratulations on the New York Times piece. I love to hear that. And Tessa?
Yeah, congratulations. That's so fantastic. What a dream come true. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything that's been said there. And, I guess to add on to that, one of the things that, whether you're a B2B or not, which in our case we are, also acknowledging the fact that everybody that works anywhere is also, in addition, a person, a consumer, they're also participating, even if they're working on the production side of things. And so I think when we look at, marketing or, our various audiences, we want to make sure that we're really targeting the consumer as much as possible, because we've also seen that having really positive impacts on those inbound requests, because people are on social media, they are, looking at the New York Times, regardless of where you are in that value chain. And I think acknowledgement from their peers as well is really important. That being said, of course, when you are targeting different audiences, you do want to make sure that you're sharing the values and communicating what's important to them as as your narrative. So what's important to a consumer when they're purchasing a product is going to be quite different from what you might be presenting at a trade show when you're talking to those manufacturers. But I think all in all, and we're in a pretty fortunate, in a way, fortunate time where I think everyone is in alignment about the fact that change does need to happen. And so I feel like our job is to showcase the reality, the viability, and how that works with each member of the supply chain.
Yeah, thank you to all three of you. Now, before I open the floor to audience questions, I actually want to throw a question out to the three of you. All three of you can answer or, not, but I would love to just ask your thoughts on the new governmental regulations that may become laws in the EU in the near future. Then you've got the Fashion Act and the Fabric Act pending across the USA and New York State. Just which of the proposed regulations are most important to your business? Will these regulations, if enacted, help to level the playing field for you and other companies like yours? And then I am curious, could you see a tax on synthetic clothing being especially helpful? So I can see Alyssa nodding away. So I'm actually going to throw the ball to you to begin. And Trisha and Tessa, please feel free to add.
I mean, I know I mentioned policy a couple of times here, but I do think it's a critical component of helping new innovations. And absolutely, we need to move away from fossil fuel-based materials. Having that tax on fossil fuel-based synthetics can definitely help us also spur new innovation as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just to quickly jump in there, I certainly agree with that. And I think as well, when we're, even going back to cost, if you are now having to pay a tax on these, pennies on the dollar products that are having even larger costs on the planet, how does that push you to rethink your business models? How does that push you to really consider the products and materials that you're working with in a way that's not just a nice to have, which I think we are transitioning out of, but it truly is a business bottom line mandate. And I think despite the reality that, I would say most large corporations are aware of, which is that their businesses are at risk if they are not to diversify their supply chains at the very least. If that's really being pushed and implemented, how does that speed up and expedite our timelines to positive circular change and not just incremental small pieces? So really looking forward to hopefully seeing those come to fruition.
Thank you for that input. Trisha, anything before we go to audience questions?
Yeah, I just want to say, the policy in Europe with the Green Deal, that is affecting everyone really globally, because that will then rise everyone up to a higher standard. I think US is really lagging behind. I hope to see that there's more support for Fabric Act to come through. As far as taxes on fibers, we've been talking about that in the US for quite some time, and how do we kind of change the traditional way that it's been. I think here it's preferred fibers across the board, that, whether you're going to tax more for a fiber that has more impact, tax less, where that starting point is, but we should tie that back with the policy and taxation kind of coming together there. It's the only way to make these changes. The innovations that are coming into the market do need support, and they need support from the government as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you to all three of you for this. So I think Earth Day team, we are great to start seeing some of these questions come through. And again, we'll keep this open. Each of you speak up as you feel comfortable. So here we have from Nancy. Once you have funding, is it hard to keep investors if progress is slow? What happens if your timeline changes? Great question.
I'll start off with that one. Yeah, it is really hard for RenewCell. They're actually public. They're traded on the NASDAQ. So that puts us in a little different category because it's no longer looking for the seed funding or the various series to go through. But we have a huge accountability then to our investors. We're very happy that we have such supportive investors and continue to provide the information that's needed. And it's really an interesting and exciting time for ESG investments.
Yeah, happy to jump in as well. And congratulations, you guys just constantly blow my mind. Way to go. Yeah, I mean, I think this is very much a fluctuating answer or question, especially as we see changing economic periods and things like that. But what I would say here is it depends on the partners. It depends who you are embracing as your, as your funding members, and the kind of narratives and things that they hold as important to them. And so, I think especially when it comes to startups, pre-Series C, let's say, or IPO, there will be changes. That is the nature of running a company, especially one that's working in an area that is very new and very innovative. And I think it's really key there to have the right partners that understand the importance of what you're doing, understand the time that it takes, because you never want to be in the position where you're having to having to discredit the reality that you're living in. And so I think transparency from the get-go is critical there, but can be challenging.
Alyssa?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when I speak with founders who are not necessarily in our industry and materials innovation for apparel and other textile-based industries, but anyone who's kind of in the hardware or deep tech or deep science innovation, this was a conversation we all often share. And I love the two comments that you each shared of, it really comes down to having the right investors behind you. Investors who see the value, they see the long-term play. They're not looking for, that short-term software-based model of returns, because it just doesn't apply to the types of science-based and technological innovations that we're setting out to scale. So that's been our experience at Kintra so far as well, we are, I think, a little bit earlier than perhaps both of you, but we're starting our scaling process right now. But as in terms of our seed round, within 12 months of our funding, we not only built our lab, we were out of the lab and on commercial equipment. So we've been moving at a very fast pace, even for a deep tech type of innovation. But with the knowledge of what we might face ahead as we continue our scaling journey to eventually get to that 60,000 ton per year goal, we know having the right investors behind us will be the most critical component of reaching that goal as well.
I think the key thing that you say there as well is the long-term vision, that they understand that to be with you. Okay, so we have another question here. Our supply chain is still rooted in China right now. Do any of your brands work with nominated mills in China?
I can start with that one. So we do work with fiber producers in China. We also do have spinners as well as knitters and weavers that have used circulose, fiber with circulose in their collections. So, and if you want to find out more about that, you can reach me on LinkedIn, Trisha Carey.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't speak to that directly because, we are still, developing our scale and really working with brand partners. That being said, I think, just overarchingly, Our mission is to really work with the existing supply chain and existing infrastructure, regardless of the region or locality that's in order for us to implement as quickly, easily, and effectively within the overarching supply chain. And so definitely foresee that in our future. But of course, again, I think that really comes with scale, and with, you know, the push and collaboration with those brand partners.
Thank you. Anything to add, Alyssa, before we move to the next question?
Yeah, sure. We're in a similar stage. We haven't integrated with mills yet. We're working on pilots with our brand partners, but we have had a lot of interest from mills all around the world. And absolutely, in this next stage, we will be beginning to evaluate the right mill partners for us and starting our integrations. And for us, and I'm sure this is across the board on this panel, we have a set of criteria that we'll look at in terms of the energy grid. Are they near to do they integrate directly and closely with where our brand partners currently manufacture, so we can kind of localize as much as possible. And of course, the different social and environmental standards that the mills maintain. So we have a list of criteria that we're looking, and we do expect that a number of the partners who've reached out to us with interest will fit the bill.
Thank you. Okay, one in for you, Tricia.
Yeah. So I saw there were a couple of questions, about our raw material. And so we do source cotton-rich fabrics. So we look for 95% cellulose base. We source from really around the world. We do look what's closest to our facility, but we've been working with sourcing and different supply routes really around the world, from Asia, from Americas, as well as from Europe. So it's really where the supply is available. And this is a whole other evolution that's happening within the collecting and sorting industry. It has existed for years, but now that there's more need for waste, we know in Europe more waste will be coming on. So there's a lot of investment in innovation in collection and sorting, which could be a whole other conversation.
Thank you. Alyssa, this one's for you. What are the eco-friendly components of your polyester?
Yes, great question. So our inputs come from renewable sources, so bio-based instead of fossil fuel-based. And our preliminary LCA showed that because it is biogenic carbon, we have a 95% reduction in emissions compared to traditional polyester. And if we envision a future, so I think a common misconception also is, where is that feedstock? That LCA is actually done using what is conventional feedstock today in the bioeconomy, which is corn, conventionally grown corn. So unequivocally, even if we're using corn, we still have a 95% reduction compared to fossil fuel-based materials. Now we can further optimize that. Imagine a future where we work with a regeneratively practiced farming practice, and that the power of plants to draw down carbon and the power of the industry to provide a reason for these farms to switch over to regenerative practices, a reason for alternative second generation feedstocks to grow, is important and critical. So step one is get off fossil fuels. We're working with the feedstocks that are available to us. Together with our brand partners, we can help drive demand for an even better feedstock where we get a carbon negative or even more emissions reduced in the future. But for now, step one, get off fossil fuels. The other eco-friendly component is, so where the sourcing, where our sources come from is important. The other component is how we arrange them. Earlier, I mentioned, we arrange to be nature aligned. It's the molecular structure of our material. It's inherently, specifically compostable. Biodegradation can cover two different types of environment. We're designing for oxygen-rich environments, so that in the wastewater treatment facility, which is an oxygen-rich environment, any fibers that are shed can safely biodegrade in that environment. And then the third component is looking at after the start, the safe usage, designing for these environments that we know materials get out into. We can't control microfiber shed, so we want to design to make sure that we're addressing that problem. The last component is, what about the textiles that are created with Kentra polyester? Because, as I mentioned earlier, polyester's entire category of materials, Kintra polyester can fit the same chemical recycling systems that are being built out for traditional polyester. And also, because our material is strong, it's soft, and it's stretchy, you no longer need to blend polyester. You don't need to blend Kintra polyester with spandex to get that feel that you do have to do with PET and spandex. So monomaterial construction can help facilitate chemical recycling and mechanical recycling processes. So we're designing all of these components, the end of life, material usage, and of course the start of life. We're considering all these aspects at the start. I hope that
answered your question. Yeah, that was great. So I think we've probably got time for two more. Trisha, Eric has a question for you. You said that your customers mix cellulose with other cellulose materials to make their fibers. Is there a specific reason to mix versus using 100% cellulose?
Eric, that's a great question. And we envision where they will be using 100% cellulose. We've done in our tests from our pilot, there's no issues on why they can't use 100% cellulose. As I mentioned, though, it's a plug and play system. So many of these fiber producers have been using wood pulp for years. So it's going to take them a little bit of time to change that. Many of them also have long-term contracts with wood pulp. And it's also looking at the efficiency through their systems, as well as where a pricing model works to scale it in. So there's a couple of factors that we understand why they're doing a mix. And so our goal is to continue to push them. Right now, I would say on average, we're around 30%. We want to push them to 50 and eventually get up more to 100. So great question. Stay tuned. We'll keep working on it.
Simonetta shares, I'm a teacher from Italy. We have projects on circular economy, but I would like to know what companies are doing to involve young people in this transition and become more responsible consumers. Tessa, can I have you start with this one?
Yeah, sure. This is a great question, and I think very close to my own personal heart, but hopefully company heart as well. Um, I think that there's a number of different initiatives to kind of focus on here. And again, I think, at least for us, we are really focused on younger generations. These are the ones asking and driving change, and the ones that will be also growing older in the decades to come. And so I think it's really important to direct our attention towards that and also help to drive, new innovators and initiatives forward to help solve for all of the other challenges our planet is facing. But I think that being said, one of the things that we've found or really, really like to do is work with our, local and regional, I guess, ecosystem as much as possible, from engaging with high school classes and middle school classes, hosting tours, going to colleges, really participating on the local level, I think is a great way for us to start. And then, hopefully collaborating as much as possible with, external institutions where we can to just help to uplift and really spread the importance of change and what we're doing and how they can support as well.
Thank you. Now, Trisha, you nodded to schools earlier when you were talking about marketing. Can you share a bit more on that here?
Yeah, well, there's a couple ways, and I think in my career, I've always felt it's important to educate. And here we've been working a lot with Transformers Foundation. They have a program called Transformers Ed, which does outreach to schools. I think, within my team, we all speak individually to schools when they reach out to us. And we're also working on putting together an education packet for schools, which would include then a video, PowerPoint, a little quiz. So we do feel it's very important to do this. It really comes down to a lot on the resources when we're trying to go in different directions. But we do give some time dedicated to education for schools.
Great. Alyssa, anything to add as we wrap up?
Oh, I think that's wonderful. I would hope we start doing more at Kintra. We've always said yes to any panel we've been invited on. We've had our fibers on display at an art museum in a local school, and we've engaged locally as much as we can by hosting tours and, again, of course, speaking on panels. But I think, as a small team, we'll hopefully continue to enhance and grow that as a part of our company ethos, because it is critical. And every time that we do get the chance to engage with the next generation of fashion designers, we're always blown away by the talent and especially the environmental forward approach. And I'll just say one more thing: we're hiring soon. So, I think our connection to schools will become even more critical in this next stage.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for joining, not just giving us your time here today, but the innovations you're leading, everything that you're looking to bring to market, and how you continue to trailblaze change in the sector. So thank you so much for everything. And also a big thank you to the Earth Day team for having us here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a delight.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. And thank you so much to our amazing panelists, Trisha, Alyssa, and Tessa. We're thrilled to have been able to present your work. This has been a great discussion and so informative. I actually have learned a tremendous amount today, and it's, I think, so incredibly important. You're just the stars of the fashion's age of invention, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you. I'm just going to end the webinar by saying again something on behalf of Earth Day. We are a big supporter of the Fashion Sustainability and Social Accountability Act, which is better known by its shorter name, the Fashion Act. The bill is now sitting in the New York State Assembly and the Senate awaiting passage. If you live in New York State, please write to your legislators to show your support for the Fashion Act. It's a bill that will, if passed, bring about much needed government regulation to the almost entirely unregulated fashion industry. Finally, thank you to Sophia Valentino at Earth Day in Washington, D.C., and Megan McGastocker of the Fashion Impact Fund. And last but certainly not least, thank you so much to all of our audience members who have been here today.